Hey YouTube, I'm Ross Stewart with Stewart Media Digital, and today I'm talking about the Sony G Master 12-24mm f2.8 zoom lens for the Sony mirrorless system. Now, I just got back from a trip to Iceland where I took this lens. I did rent it through aperturance.com. Be sure to check them out in the link below if you're interested in renting any gear. Now, first up, let's just look at some pictures I took with this lens. Now, I really specifically took this lens on a trip to get some landscape photos. I don't otherwise have a ton of application for going out to 12 millimeters. This lens is really for landscape photographers and could probably be useful for people who shoot real estate, architecture, stuff like that. At 12 millimeters, for a lot of subjects, it is going to have sort of that warped perspective where it sort of stretches out at the sides. 12 millimeters is really wide. But for what this lens is good for, it is really good. It is expensive. It is $3,000 US. So it is one of the pricier lenses that Sony makes in this price range. All right, so now to get into the nitty gritty. First up, let's talk about the build quality. This lens is a G Master lens, so as you'd come to expect from Sony's G Master line, it is extremely well built. It feels great in the hand, it feels really sturdy. It is just under 2 pounds. Honestly, when I got my hands on this lens, I noticed it's a lot smaller and lighter than I expected. I expected an ultra wide lens with a maximum aperture of 2.8 to be a really big honking lens, but it's actually not so bad. It balances pretty nicely, as nice as you can expect, on Sony's mirrorless bodies, including its APS-C bodies, although obviously it is going to be particularly front heavy on those APS-C bodies. One of the first things you'll notice when looking at this lens is that it does have a built-in lens hood, which is pretty nice. At this range, it would be pretty tricky to get a lens hood on here otherwise, so it's nice that it's built in. Now let's talk about the rings. The zoom ring feels really nice going from 12 to 24. You can really pinpoint an exact focal length that you want. It's got a good amount of resistance and it feels really good in the hand. It does telescope though as you zoom in and out, but it telescopes inside of its own body and the lens hood. So even though you do see it kind of bulging in and out, it is still fairly protected and it's not going to throw off your weight and balance that much if you have it on a gimbal or something like that, for example. Now, something about this built-in lens hood is that you cannot use regular filters. It has a slot in the back for very specific filters if you want to use ND filters or those circular polarizers or any of those filters. You are going to have to get special ones for this lens. Now, the manual focus ring is also really nice. I do not tend to prefer focus by wire, but this manual focus ring has a really good amount of resistance and it feels really nice to turn. So when you do end up using manual focus, you can get really precise results. Now, in terms of features, the lens only has a couple more things. It has an autofocus manual focus switch and one autofocus lock button. And as always, those autofocus lock buttons can be programmed to pretty much anything you want. And this lens is weather sealed, which is really nice. In Iceland, where I had this lens, it was misting. There was mist coming off of waterfalls. There was a little bit of rain pretty much every day I was there. So knowing that it is weather sealed was really nice. It does have a fluorine coating in the front and a nice little rubber gasket in the back, and all the joints and buttons and switches are weather sealed. One thing to mention though, the lens cap is pretty awkward. It covers the front of the lens and it does not click on very securely. I actually lost mine out somewhere in the Icelandic wilderness, which extremely sucks because I rented this lens and I'm sure they're gonna charge me some huge amount of money to replace that lens cap. But definitely, if you do end up getting this lens, be sure to keep an eye on that lens cap or get one of those fancy rubber ones that covers the front of the lens much more securely. All right, moving on to image quality. The image quality of this lens is absolutely top-notch. It is sharp from corner to corner. It has 17 elements in 4 groups, including 3 extreme spherical elements, 2 super extra low dispersion elements, and 3 extra low dispersion elements, as well as a nano anti-reflective coating, and that's the second version of Sony's anti-reflective coating. So when you're shooting a landscape and you've got the sunset in the background, it does handle that really nicely with that anti-reflective coating. Now let's talk about bokeh. This lens has 9 rounded aperture blades for some really nice creamy bokeh. Of course, 12mm to 24mm, you're not going to get a ton of bokeh in most of your shots unless you are fairly close to your subject. And the minimum focusing distance is just under 1 foot or 0.28 meters. So getting bokeh with this lens is not going to be super easy and probably not something that a lot of people are going to do unless they're just messing around and getting really close to a subject and putting it at 12mm and getting that weird warped perspective. But for most people, bokeh is probably not why you're picking up this lens in the first place. But when you do get it, it's pretty nice. Now let's talk about the autofocus. It has an advanced XD linear motor for some very good autofocus. It's not the snappiest or the best autofocus I've ever used, but at this wide focal range, it is plenty good for everything that I could possibly use it for. Not the snappiest, but I really cannot complain about the autofocus. It worked accurately and it worked really well. And as always, let's finish off by talking about some of this lens's competitors. Probably its biggest competitor is the Sony G 12-24 f4. That lens is only about $1,800 and it is a little bit smaller and lighter. It only has 7 aperture blades, so it's not going to be quite as smooth. It has fewer extreme extra low dispersion elements, so you're not going to get quite as good of image quality, but you're saving $1,200. You are also losing a stop of low light, going from f4 to 2.8. So those are things you're gonna have to decide. Like I said, I rented this lens, and if I was going to buy a lens in the 12-24 focal length, I would probably pick up this f4 version at this lower price point. And another one of its major competitors, and I actually own this lens, is the 16-35 G Master 2.8. It doesn't go quite as wide, it only goes to 16, so you lose quite a bit of that ultra wide part of the focal length, but it does go all the way to 35mm. So in my opinion, if you just want a nice wide angle zoom lens, the 16-35 is going to be better for most people. It is a G Master lens, so you still get excellent image quality, great bokeh at that 2.8 maximum aperture, and great autofocus. But like I said, that 16-35 focal length is going to be more useful and more versatile to most people unless you just really need that ultra wide range going all the way out to 12mm. And that lens is only $2,200, so the 16-35 is also quite a bit cheaper. And finally, wrapping things up, I had a really great time using this lens. I got some of my favorite photos that I have ever taken out in Iceland. If you are interested in landscape photography, if you're going on a big trip that's gonna have awesome landscapes, I definitely recommend, at the very least, renting this lens. I rented mine through aperturent.com. Please use my link in the description below if you're interested in renting lenses also. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, and as always, be sure to like and subscribe.